hosting without Kyle. Kyle's on the road in Europe, actually, and it will be great to get his perspective on how things are looking with some of the customers and folks he's been meeting with overseas. But I'll be your host today. Again, lead strategic business development at Vision, and joined today by a guest. We've got Grant Cernick at Third Wave. Grant, you lead sales and marketing there, but tell us a little bit more about your role and about Third Wave.
Sure. Well, thank you. I've been at Third Wave for about 10 years. I think maybe it's 11 years now. We're a platform that helps importers and exporters manage their international supply chain, transportation, and trade compliance. And so we've been partners with Vision for, well, I don't even know how long it's been. It's been a long time.
I think we're going on almost 4 years. 4 years, I'd say. Yeah.
No. It's much longer than that, Ben. It's for sure you fall into the pre-COVID world, which puts us at I want to say 2019 or 2020, but we are partners with Vision because Vision provides great status updates for ocean that we as a platform use to inform the supply chain information and process that our customers have for moving their international shipments. So
and such a great perspective that you can bring. Obviously, we've had many different guests on TradeView Live over the years, but Grant, you're one in particular that I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while. So thanks for joining.
Well, I certainly appreciate being asked to be on, and it's a real privilege to represent both Third Wave and maybe the partner view with Vision and our relationship. So anyway, thanks, Ben.
Well, we'll go through our normal disclosures for anyone joining TradeView Live for one of the first times. You might be asking yourself, what is TradeView? What are we here to talk about, or what are when we reference data, where is it coming from? TradeView is Vision's platform for trade intelligence. We source from 57% of all global ocean container traffic, 3 times more than the closest provider out there. We profile over 1.5 million companies, their import and export activity, and we create 90-day forward-looking trade forecasts. We add in all fun types of AI research and custom performance insights into this platform, and that's what we'll be offering insights from as we talk about some of the topics facing the world of supply chain today. The data that is powering TradeView is a slew of 270 plus data sources from ocean carriers and what they publish to satellite providers, ports and terminals. But more importantly, we're accessing bookings. We're accessing actual shipment transactions from shippers directly to carriers, showing the demand side, showing the leading indicators as far as how a shipper's responding to events in the world and adjusting the containers they intend to ship. And what that means is that we can now look forward and up to 90 days in advance, be able to tell you what's being booked, where it's going, when it's going to arrive, and more importantly, measure increases or decreases in capacity, trade flows, congestion, or performance. So with that being said, a lot's happened. A lot's happened this year. A lot's happened since we started doing TradeView Live. We're coming on now just over a year since Liberation Day, right? When this whole recent trend of reporting on in near real time shipment trends, demand signals. And what I wanted to bring up, and Grant, kind of look at your perspective of what you've experienced at Third Wave for the last year, are global bookings, which for the last 4 years have remained right near or around 6 million TEU, at least in our TradeView platform, in the month of March, and which we've actually now seen start to creep upwards. CTS, global demand data, actually has year-over-year increase for January and February. Typically, you want to combine those months together because Chinese New Year can fall in January or in February. So rather than looking at only individual months, combining January and February, I think CTS reported nearly a 10% year-on-year growth for 2026 versus last year. And we wanted to go ahead and reveal March, which for our TradeView data is showing an even higher increase in demand. So really interesting to see that in spite of everything that's happening, from tariffs that might be illegal, might still be getting implemented in other ways, from wars that seem to potentially be ending soon, but still don't have clarity. Grant, what are you all hearing at Third Wave? What are your customers experiencing, and what challenges are they facing?
So, I think from where I'm sitting, my customers are maybe a little bit of a mixed bag. They are pretty much, everybody is quite sensitive to the tariffs and the impact, and we've been dealing with this. Yes, there was Liberation Day, but practically speaking, we've really been dealing with this since the first Trump presidency, right? With the introductions of the 301s, which impacted trade in China. So our customers that were transacting in China have sort of systematically worked to reduce reliance on a supply chain that is founded in China to move to other places. Now, going back to 2018, they were not. They did not move from China back to the United States. That was, I guess, never the articulated point of the tariffs. They moved from China to other places: Taiwan, Cambodia, Vietnam, Pakistan, and places like that. And then, at Liberation Day, tariffs were applied to everybody, and that again changed the dynamic of sort of a strategy for where they want to locate or think about locating their manufacturing bases.
Right.
And so, they've had there are two separate issues that they've had to deal with. And they really are separate, although they're very much related. The first is nobody is capable of moving manufacturing from one place to another place overnight. Mm-hmm. And so there's sort of like a longer term strategy around what does this do? How do we need to position ourselves globally to deal with the dynamics of the world as they present to us on any given day? And then the second thing is, okay, well, but there are tariffs today, right, and we need to be able to come up with a strategy for how to deal with those tariffs, given that we cannot move overnight from China to other places to deal with the issues. And so the impact almost invariably was demand went down immediately to a certain amount, while the strategies and things resolved themselves. And pricing had to change, and so on and so forth. And then the volumes went back approximately to where they were previously to accommodate, like once things had worked through the reasonably complex system that exists in international trade.
Yeah.
And so, sitting here today in 2026 compared to where we were maybe back in 2018, you see really quite a different set of places where our customers maybe have set up shop overseas. Their volumes have rebounded, and their businesses have, continued to persist and grow. And so, the point I would make with all of this is, it seems to me that that almost nobody was right as to how tariffs are going to impact stuff in general.
Yeah.
And so that really, like, if there's a takeaway from everything, it is there are people that were doomsday sayers saying like everything is going to blow up, and that was wrong. Right. And there are people that said this isn't going to really have an impact, and that was wrong. It's like sort of like everybody was wrong on this thing. Right. And what is really happening is the underlying dynamics have changed, and that's going to result in change.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is when we look at recent trends, and I mean just in the last probably 6 months. And what I mean is looking at this green line from Q3 to Q4 of last year, right? So this is near the end of 2025. This is US export bookings, by the way, but we're also going to look at US import bookings, which show a similar story. And into 2026, we see this contraction, and we see it even more pronounced for import bookings, which again, if I look at the green line, was below 2024 levels and maybe right at 2023 levels. And when we go into 2026, we are now, again, at least for the first 2 months of the year, below last year's levels. So export bookings show this more severe contraction. Import bookings, maybe not as pronounced, and maybe in the month of March actually starting to rebound. But either way, to align it with CTS data, which shows that global demand has increased 10%, North American import demand is actually down 7%. So help me understand how that could be a response to what's happened in the last year. It could be a product of interest rates. It could be a product of just consumer demand. What helps you understand the causes that could be behind that contraction when global demand is growing? North American import demand, at least for the last 3 months, seems to be shrinking.
So, let's first understand, like, I'm not an economist and not as smart as those guys are, but my general feeling would be that what you could at a administrative level, you can, or a political level, you can agree or disagree with what is what the Trump administration is doing. But it is hard to argue with whatever is happening with the U.S. administration is creating some level of uncertainty. Some might call it chaos. It doesn't matter, but the uncertainty is much higher in trade if you are an international partner, or not a partner, just somebody transacting with the United States. And as a result of that, both on the import side and the export side, the United States just seems to be less reliable than they historically have been. And as a result, if you are in the international domain, the natural result would be that you would look elsewhere to try to solve whatever problems you have from an import or export or transaction perspective, which could result in a similar set of activities that you are representing here, both with export and import bookings, that basically, hey, listen, if I don't see security in dealing with America, then I'm going to look to source things elsewhere, and that's going to result in export bookings from the United States going down. And if it's more expensive from a U.S. perspective, if you're resident in the United States, if it's more expensive, Econ 101 would suggest that prices are going up, therefore demand is going to go down, and that would explain why the import bookings maybe have gone down, although look like they might be rebounding. In the month
potentially
of March.
I mean, February was especially interesting, seeing just how low that was. Looking over a 4-year span, basically at its lowest levels, 2023 is the only real comparable data point. But right. You're right. In March, we seem to be bouncing back. Potentially that has to do with the Supreme Court ruling and the process now of some of these tariff refunds getting issued by CBP. Although there still seems to be a lot of uncertainty. Tariffs will still get put in place through other means. We have the Middle East war and war in Iran continuing to disrupt flows. And inflation, and they're not spiking, but they haven't come down, right? And so that adds to that overall landed cost. If you're an importer, if you're looking at, hey, do I bring in my goods now with freight rates the way that they are, or do I wait closer to peak season? And I'm thinking like the May, June, July months to then start bringing in a lot of the freight that I need for the fall. Maybe you're still in kind of a wait and see mode as a U.S. importer.
I think that's exactly right. And then beyond that, you mentioned the refund of the tariffs, the potential refund of the tariffs, the lack of clarity as to how refunds are going to be issued, who is responsible for receiving those. I mean, clearly it's the importer of record, but when you look at outfits like UPS or DHL who are doing things and they are the importer of record, that might not flow down to the actual beneficial cargo owner or the owner of the goods. So like where that money is going to reside ultimately at the end of the day can be a question mark. And so you just have sort of like, again, it's sort of like there's this lack of clarity as to how things are operating, and that lack of clarity creates uncertainty, and that uncertainty creates a lack of will to invest and commit to things, right? And that's one of the things that people do talk about, but maybe not enough around. Just you don't need it if provided the system is unclear, people won't act the way you want them to act. Right. And that's the nature of the world that we live in today to a large extent. And that has consequences. And I think the data is kind of representing that as you're explaining it.
Yeah. So needless to say, and I probably said this before, it will be very interesting to see what happens in the next 2 weeks, both on the geopolitical side with discussions that sound like they're happening even this week with Iran, but also just on the trade data side, right? We'll be looking at a complete month of April at our next TradeView Live session. So that next month, which if you look at the green line in 2025, showed the beginning of the effect of what was Liberation Day, April 1st of last year. We saw that downward trend. So I think it'll be really telling to see where we are in comparison to April of last year in 2 weeks' time, and whether or not we're kind of flat, whether we're starting to see some of that year-over-year increase, or if there's still kind of this wait and see mode, which would mean we see depressed U.S. import demand. So let's move on from there into kind of your original comment about what's happened over the last 10 years, right? Starting with President Trump's first term in 2016, that you have an alternative origin like Vietnam. And what we see here is consistent growth year on year. Every one of these lines is growing after the other, with 2025 being, again, a record year for Vietnam exports, and the first few months of 2026 showing nothing different. January and February, again, you want to combine those two because this year, Chinese New Year actually fell into February. And so we saw January very high, February slightly lower. Again, combine that together, you have year-on-year growth. And of course, the month of March, we have this upward trend. Do we think that's just going to continue? And again, I'm thinking of bunker fuel surcharges, the fact that Vietnam and others like China and Singapore are affected negatively by what's going on in Iran with a lot of the crude oil not getting out of the region, and this origin being impacted by the war, and yet there's still growth. So is that going to continue, Grant? What's your thought on what's been a trend, like you said, for the last 10 years, and just in the last 2 months, despite the war, despite all the things going on, do we think Vietnam is going to continue to grow?
Yeah, so my feeling is that there are competing drivers for what's happening, and the scale of sort of which driver is going to pervade or dominate is still unclear. You have the overarching long-term trend of companies are moving out of China into other Asian countries that are seen as the next best thing to China, given that the United States and China are antagonistic. And Vietnam has always been held as one of those countries that are more sophisticated from a manufacturing perspective on a certain set of commodities. And I think that as we said earlier, you can't change this on a dime. You don't pick up a manufacturing facility and magically overnight move it into a different region or a different country. And so that overarching long-term trend for those companies that were moving from China to Vietnam is going to continue. And it's sort of like that's going to continue sort of for the foreseeable future until the next country is, Vietnam is the place you don't want to be, and you're going to want to move somewhere else.
Right.
But at the same time, you do have those the dynamics of the international world where there is conflict in Iran. Iran sources or supplies 20% of oil, 20% of global oil, but more like 50 or 60% of oil that goes to Asia. Yeah. And so that the spigot has been effectively eliminated to a large extent is going to have dramatic impact on Vietnam and the operations of Vietnam. Will they be able to source their energy elsewhere? Potentially. There's Russia. There's Russia. There's the United States that is supplying oil and natural gas now, potentially more and globally. There are other players, Venezuela, Canada, and so on and so forth. But it's a long way away, and the supply lines have been very well established from Iran to Asia, generally speaking. And so that's going to be a headwind that has to be dealt with. And so my expectation is, it's not going to be as strong as it would be if energy was ubiquitous and cheap. But that the tailwind of companies moving away from China to Vietnam is probably going to continue. And so we're in this nether region where it's tough to know what's going to dominate.
Well, ultimately, it's a question of who is that cost passed on to, right? If you think about the cost of fuel, the cost of operating trucks, moving containers to Vietnam ports or running facilities, all of this is run off of fuel. If the cost of fuel in Vietnam goes up, someone's got to pay for it. Is it the Vietnam consumer? Is it the manufacturers and the exporters and the suppliers? Or is it the buyers, right? And really, I mean, the American importers, mostly. I'm sure there's many European importers that import from Vietnam as well. But the buyers, and going back to our demand, can it? Because like you said, it's not an overnight thing. This has been a trend that's happening for 10 years, moving sourcing strategies from China to Vietnam. And a lot of these buyers have relationships.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think your point is exactly right, and taken to a slightly higher level, somebody's paying, right? And again, Econ 101 suggests that if costs are going up, if costs are going up, demand is going to go down, and so that is certainly globally going to, like, that's a dynamic that's happening almost certainly with energy and energy prices. And the question is given that you're cutting out 20%, I think, of oil supply into the global market, what is that impact going to be as it relates to Vietnam? And it's, globally the prices have gone up, and that's got to have some kind of impact.
It's going to eventually be seen somewhere. And maybe you make a good point that these March numbers could have been even higher if not for the war in Iran. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see in April. I think Vietnam to US, a slide that I meant to share before, echoes these same points. Looks directionally almost identical, except for some of the ups and downs in 2025 due to some of those temporary tariffs that we did put on Vietnam. China export bookings, of course, tell a very different picture, mostly depressed demand, and Pakistan export bookings is one we wanted to highlight as well, showing some of that same increase, but not the same spike as what we saw for Vietnam as the origin. Now, with the last few minutes that we have here, I wanted to talk about something that we haven't really shown in TradeView Live very much, but is very much something prominent in the TradeView platform, and that's the profile of companies that we're able to see where they're sourcing from, using our bookings and using U.S. customs data, and being able to see companies like Costco, Amazon, Walmart shifting their supplier sourcing strategy away from China. And even just looking at 2025 in comparison to 2026 so far. Obviously, like you said, Grant, this started potentially 10 years ago, if not more than that. But I wanted to highlight this as an example of some of the top importers and what we're seeing in terms of year-over-year volume changes when specifically China was indicated as the origin, to highlight the impact of just what's happened since April 1st of last year. And Grant, I don't know if you have any anecdotes about some of your own customers that have responded in a similar way after April 1st of last year when we think about that China origin strategy.
Yeah, I would say a general theme that I would say existed probably was more prominent as it relates to again, going back to 2018 and the first signs that, with the 301 tariffs, that China was going to be a target of attack, was the instigating point of a strategy to generally try to get out of China if you could. Mm-hmm. Now, not everybody can, right? But I think that, again, it doesn't happen overnight. And what you're seeing, like a drop in 26% in 1 year, that too doesn't happen overnight, right? That was, again, I don't know what the Walmart, like what's happening, but one would think that Walmart has accelerated their exit from China and is sort of like in full throttle today. And the same would apply to Costco. And just interestingly, you see that with Walmart US and, Walmart Canada, Canada is not in the same tier as the United States is vis-a-vis China. You can see that they're still trading and they don't have a problem with working with China in Canada. And so, I think that it's just the continuation. The tariffs are going to persist even with the new administration, whenever that, in 3 years. And so I think that we're going to see this trend continue, and companies are going to continue to try to reassess and really get to friendshoring or nearshoring or friendshoring in some meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, to contrast the story here with I think this echoes what we were sharing before about Vietnam, but again, highlighting some of the individual companies that just in the last 12 months, and what I'm doing is we're comparing year-to-date numbers. So January until April of this year in comparison to last year, we see companies like Walmart, Target, big furniture importers like Ashley Furniture, apparel companies like Old Navy, Gap, and Nike, all of them dramatically shifting their imports from Vietnam and increasing that. Not necessarily that it's an equal amount that they moved away from China, right? Vietnam is not the only alternative origin, but either way, all of these companies are bringing in many more containers from Vietnam than they did before. And if we think about the trade deals that were put in place, Vietnam does have many of the concessions, many of the more favorable tariffs versus maybe someone like India that was for a while being imposed a 50% tariff. So, there was clearly a pattern over the course of last year that encouraged this shift, and sounds like might be a shift that's permanent, that's here to stay when we think about the sourcing strategy moving forward for many of these companies. Vietnam now going to be an origin that will continue to grow for them. And overall, I wanted to add one final note here, not just on the importers and the consignees we see named in the TradeView data, but the fact that for every TradeView booking, we see the carrier that it's booked with. So we see a lot of different earnings releases coming out in the last few weeks from some carriers, some reporting a loss, some reporting an increase in volume, but a decrease in overall rate. Some reporting a decrease in volume, but an increase in rate. I think in this case, we're just showing volume, really a market share in that respect. And what we see is that Maersk actually has seen the biggest decline, at least so far, year-to-date comparisons, while MSC, CMA, and HAPAG show modest, sometimes 5 or more % increase year on year. And in the case of CMA, actually a 15% growth year to date so far in comparison to last year. Grant, any thoughts on this? This sort of carrier market share? Is this something? Yeah, you have any thoughts on?
So I don't really have a whole lot of insight into this. What I do know is I do believe Maersk has a new strategy that was articulated not long ago, and
right, they're okay not being the largest carrier in the world. That's something they're fine with, and approaching volume more from the perspective of alliances and growing their logistics services arm more than just the carrier.
Exactly, and so it's tough for me. It's tough to make sense of this, and maybe a little bit out of my sweet spot.
And I think overall, for us, what we're highlighting is the footprints that these carriers have, their pricing strategies as it relates to capturing volume, and that some of these carriers, maybe MSC here at the top, are okay sacrificing premiums on freight rates in exchange for capturing more volume overall. That's, I think, my takeaway, at least from what this is highlighting. And what we see here is some of the top ports that are benefiting from some of this increased volume, where origin ports like Shanghai and Singapore and Ningbo are all growing significantly year on year. Destinations, at least for some of the top US destinations, relatively flat. And that was the last insight we wanted to bring. We are 3 minutes over. So Grant, I will leave you with the final word. Any advice, any comments? If I'm an importer and I'm trying to decide on my import strategy, if I'm going to commit to these long-term contracts with carriers, or what I need to be looking out for over the course of the next, I guess, 8 months remaining in 2026, what advice would you give?
My advice would be sort of from a technology strategy perspective, that basically almost everything that we were talking about today, Ben, falls into the category of there is a lot going on in the world today. There are a lot of drivers. There's a lot of change going on. And my overarching feeling is that this is not going away anytime soon. Mm-hmm. And so we are now operating in a world where there is lots of change. There's lots of variability. And if you're an importer of any consequence, the single biggest thing that you ought to be focusing on today is, do you have the technology underpinnings to enable you to be successful in understanding the changing dynamics of the world? And if the answer is no, then you might want to give Ben or me a call, and we could help you navigate that world. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Well, Grant, it's a pleasure as always, but thank you especially for joining TradeView Live. And we will see you all again in 2 weeks' time. All right. Thanks for having me, Ben. Really appreciate it. Take care. Bye-bye.